I go now to my very short sharing for this week. And my short sharing is entitled, God Knows My Fear. You know, the previous time I was here on stage, I talked about how with faith we can walk on water, how faith is crucial to our Christian life, how when God asks us to do something, and oftentimes when God does something, it is something that is beyond our natural means, something that we're used to doing, God will not ask us to do. But God will ask us to do something that we're not used to doing. And to do all these things, that will be a challenge to us, that we may find too challenging. In fact, we need faith. But what we also mentioned briefly during that time is that a lot of times when we want to move forward in faith, something blocks us, and that is called fear. God knows our fear. Fear keeps us where we are. So the previous time I was here, I talked about Peter. Peter, in faith, he walked out of the boat onto the water. But in fear, he lost his composure. In fear, he sank into the water. But what about the other 11 disciples of Jesus? They remained in the boat. They had fear also. And their fear was so strong that it stopped them from even coming out of the boat to even try what Peter was trying. Fear keeps us in the boat. Fear keeps us where we are. And everyone has fears. Everyone has something that they are afraid of. For some people, they are afraid of cockroaches, like the week before, whenever you're watching, whatever time you're watching. The previous time, the last service we had, Sister Hua Chen was sharing about how she's afraid of cockroaches. Sometimes our fear can be something as small as that. Sometimes we're afraid of something that's more serious. We could be afraid of being poor. We could be afraid of losing our jobs. We could be afraid of our loved ones passing away. We could be afraid of all kinds of things. But everyone is afraid of something. This is a topic that I feel very well acquainted with, because actually I'm a very fearful person. The reason that I worry so much, the reason that I'm so negative, is because the fears surround me. The fears are inside my head, they're inside my heart, and they come and disturb me all the time. I keep thinking about what if this happens, what if that happens. Fear is something that I feel a lot of at many moments in my life. But we cannot be stopped by fear. If we are always afraid, how will we follow Jesus? If we're always afraid, how will we go and see the things that God has prepared for us? Therefore, though we all have fear, some of us have more fear than others, the commonality that all of us should see is that none of us should be constrained by fear. So how then should we tackle this fear? How then do we deal with these fears so that we can move forward in faith? And that's what I'm going to try and talk about today. I'm going to take my main Bible reference from the story of Gideon, and that's found in Judges chapter 6 and 7. It's a very, very interesting story to me. And I think many of you, and maybe even many of our children who have gone to CBC, are very familiar with this story. Now let's talk a bit about the background of this story. We know that during this time in Israel's history, they were being oppressed by another people called the Midianites. And they cried out to God for help. And so God decided to raise up this man called Gideon to rescue the Israelites, to rescue his people by attacking the enemy. And Gideon had a problem. He was afraid. The reason he was afraid was because the task that was in front of him was, shall we say, a mammoth task. If we skip ahead some parts and we go to the main part of the story where the climax is, and that's where God is telling Gideon, now it is time to attack the Midianites, to conquer them and to rescue your people. But God set conditions, and one of the very big conditions that God set was that God only gave him 300 men. Only 300 men Gideon was allowed to have. How many men did the Midianites have? They had 135,000 soldiers. And if you work it out, the ratio is in excess of 1 to 400, which means that one Israelite must be able to defeat 400 Midianites by himself in order to have a chance of success. This is a task that, can we say, where defeat is almost certain. And so Gideon now had a problem. He had to ask himself, did he hear God wrongly? Or if he heard God correctly, was this God really mighty enough to deliver him? Was this God really able to rescue all of them out of these ridiculous circumstances, from these ridiculous odds? Could they really even imagine a victory? So we can see that understandably, Gideon was given a task that was too much for him, and he was afraid. Like many of us, he was afraid. Probably he has more reason to be afraid than many of us who are watching right now. How did God deal with this fear? Well, I'll tell you what God didn't do. God didn't disregard his fear. Because if we were to look at Judges chapter 7, verse 9, this is the part where God tells Gideon that, look, now is the time you are going to attack them. Now is the moment where it is do or die. Now is the time where the rubber meets the road, where you really can see, will God deliver? And at that time, when God delivers that instruction to go, God also has an interesting offer that I don't really see in many parts of the Bible. And that's in verse 10. God says that if you are afraid to attack, go down to the camp with your servant and listen to what the soldiers are saying. Afterward, you will be encouraged to attack the camp. So here we see that Gideon was afraid, which we know. But what we may not realize is that God acknowledges his fear. God knew that Gideon would be afraid. So God arranged something to encourage Gideon to deal with his fear. Now, how did God do it? Very interestingly, a few verses later, when Gideon took up God's offer and he walked down to the enemy camp, he sneaked with his servant, just him and his servant, sneaking in the darkness. As they went, a man was telling a friend his dream. That's a soldier talking to another soldier. He said, I had a dream. A round loaf of barley bread came tumbling into the Midianite camp. It struck the tent with such force that the tent overturned and collapsed. Now, this other friend responded, oh, this can be nothing other than the sword of Gideon, son of Joash, the Israelite. God has given the Midianites and the whole camp into his hands. So we see here that there was a dream that really encouraged Gideon, that made Gideon feel like, wow, God is really with me. God has prepared the road. These people are so afraid of me and the Israelites, not because of what I've done, but because God has put this strange fear inside of them. Let's think about this moment where Gideon was encouraged. Let's think about this moment for a moment. I call this moment a great cosmic coincidence. Or is it really a coincidence? Let's look at the 4 areas of coincidence in this one moment. First of all, coincidentally, Gideon had to arrive at a spot where these 2 soldiers were stationed. If you arrive at a spot where other soldiers are, he wouldn't be able to hear this. The second coincidence, coincidentally, soldier A must have had that dream the night before. If the dream he dreamt after this moment, he wouldn't be able to talk about that dream. Coincidence 3, coincidentally, soldier B, his friend, had to have heard of Gideon. If not, how would the dream make sense? And this soldier B had to have been smart enough to try and interpret this dream in such a discouraging way. If soldier A had been speaking to another soldier entirely who didn't bother to interpret this dream, how would Gideon be encouraged? How would this fear spread? The fourth coincidence, both soldiers had to have been talking at the same time that Gideon arrived. If he arrived 1 minute later or 1 minute after where this dream was being discussed, Gideon would not been able to hear anything that encouraged him. So we can see here there are 4 coincidences. Could things really be so coincidental? Could it just be a great cosmic coincidence? Perhaps there is a very small chance that this is so. Was it really random chance? Or can we say that this is God's amazing plan, God's amazing arrangement, such that everything meets together. Everything is prepared to meet together for one purpose. And that purpose is to encourage this fearful servant of the Lord. You see, what amazed me in this part of the Bible is that God slowed down His plan. You know, God's concern is bigger than one person. God's concern is for the thousands and thousands of Israelites that are being oppressed. God's concern is for one entire nation. And yet He slowed His plan down. He had a separate branch of the plan just for this one person. What a good God we have. And we know that because of this encouragement by the Lord, Gideon and his people, the 300, they really went to attack the camp, and the way they attack, it just beggars belief. There is no military strategy here that makes sense, because in their left hand they have torches, in their right hand they have trumpet. How do they fight? With their head? Cannot be, right? What are they going to do? Take the torch and throw at the enemy the sword? No, it doesn't make sense. But somehow, when they ran down, when they made so much noise, the Midianites were seized with fear and they ran. They ran away and they defeated themselves because the Lord caused chaos to be upon the camp. So God's plan worked. God really brought victory to the whole Israel by Himself. And it's only the Lord who can take credit for everything that had happened in this salvation of the Israelites. But more than that, from how God treated Gideon, I realized that sometimes we have the wrong concept of God, like I do many times. Now, even though we talk a lot about God as our Father, every time we talk a lot about how God loves us, and we kind of know this, but actually many of us, including me, we still think of God as a boss, as our boss. With a boss, we have to obey. Am I right? For those of us who have been working, we joined the working world, we know that we can't always rely on our boss for solutions. A lot of times, our bosses employ us in order for us to find solutions for him or her. And the attitude that a lot of bosses have towards their employees is, just get it done. I don't care how you do it, I just care that you must get it done. So because God is our boss, we just have to carry out his orders to us somehow. And that brings stress. And that's why a lot of Christians, they feel that when they are reading all the things that they must do as a Christian, we must do this and this and this and this and this. Or we can't do this, we can't do this, we can't do that. We feel discouraged, we feel afraid, and we give up. Because we think that we just have to force ourselves to do it somehow. For example, Jesus says, when you look at a woman, you cannot look at her lustfully in your heart. Just like that. Lustfully in your heart also cannot. You never do anything, also never mind. You just cannot look even in your heart. You cannot think anything. How is this something that is possible for us to do? And so when we see this, we think, this one, I think definitely I can't do it. But we feel stressed. Feel like, but God expects me to do it. So no choice. I just have to find a way to do it. It's like, when I was a young teacher, or even before I was teaching, I remember the times when I was I was still in a teacher training college in university. At that time, our church had this tuition center for teenagers, and I was teaching English in this tuition center. Every Saturday, every Sunday, we would meet in the church. We would use one of the classrooms in the C block, and we would get students who come in. Some students are from our church, and some students are not from our church, non-Christians. And they come in, and we have to teach them different subjects. I taught them English. Do you know that those times were so difficult for me? Yes, people would say, oh, Danny's English is very good. But what they don't know is that his teaching is not so good. And it was very difficult for me to think of creative lesson plans. And that 1 year, that 1.5 years, every weekend, I would really be so stressed. I would be thinking, how do I teach? How will I bring up the English standard? I had nobody. I didn't know who to ask. And I didn't know where to refer. I didn't know where I could find the answer. I didn't know how to plan for the entire year. But I just knew that I had to teach. I just have to find a way somehow. Nobody is able to help me. And so that kind of fear carried over to when I became a full teacher, when I really graduated, and when I went into teaching for real, to teach in a proper government secondary school. I felt stressed, especially for the first or second year. I just didn't know how to teach. All my university mates, all my college mates from the teacher training college, they did so well. They were able to go into class, they could manage the students so well. They just seemed to know how to teach students. And I didn't know where to start. And that's the kind of stress that I felt. Sometimes, as a Christian, it's like that. We don't know how. We just think that we have to do. Oh, follow Jesus. Give up everything. I don't know how. But die, just have to do it. Oh, don't sin so much. I don't know how. I don't think possible. But better do. Just have to try my best and do it. Because if not, maybe later go hell, how? Or maybe, must give tithing. Must give this money. Every month I really cannot make ends meet. Paying off all the loans. Still must give. Don't know how. Just got to do it somehow. This is the wrong concept of God. What is the right concept of God? God is not our boss. God is our Father. What does this mean? Whereas for a boss we say, I have to obey. For a father we say, I should obey. I want to obey. And I can obey because He's my Father. In a very healthy father and child relationship, obeying our Father is no hardship because we know that the things that our Father wants us to do is because He loves us. And our Father has done so much for us. We know how much He loves us. For us to give that little bit is no price to pay as well. And because God is our Father, He knows our fears and He helps us. You see, it's just like how when I teach my daughter Christina to swim, when we first get her used to being with water, we got a tub in the toilet, we filled it with water, we fitted her with the swimming costume, we gave her a nice big float, that would really surround her body, and she would never be able to drown in the tub in the toilet. And we took her and we put her in the water. Now I want to show you videos of this, but my wife says better not because this is going to be online. We should make sure we protect our daughter's privacy a little bit. But you just imagine that our daughter inside that small tub and she's looking up at us in fear. It's like, what's happening? What's happening? Why am I inside here? She doesn't know what to do with her hands and her legs. She wants to get up because it's so uncomfortable. And we just try, come on baby, it's just water, it's like shower. You just come try to paddle. But the baby is so scared. So we don't push it. We take her out and we try another day. So a few weeks ago, we brought her to this swimming pool. Likewise, we put her in the swimming costume. We get her a nice big float. The float is bigger than her. It's 2 or 3 times her size. We put her in, and I get into the water, and she gets into the water, and I hold on to the float. And still, the baby is fearful. Say, She's so scared. And so what do? I try. I say, baby, don't worry. Papa is here. It's okay. So I try to get her interested. I want her to get used to the water because later on, I want her to learn how to swim. But she is still afraid. So what do? I stop first. And I try again. When we get her in, later on, a couple of weeks later, suddenly, she's not so afraid of the water. She realized that, hey, the water isn't so scary. It's like that. So as a father, when I want my daughter to not be afraid of water, is that good or bad? Is that for me or is that for her? It's certainly for her. But when she's afraid, and many babies are, what should I do as a father? Should I smack her and say, you stupid girl, why are you so cowardly? Where is your faith in your father? I tell you to swim, you just do it. I tell you to get the water, you just do it. Don't talk so much. Do I put her there and just stand behind like that and say, go. I ask you to do what? Just do it. No, that's not what a father would do. A father would be very sensitive to the fear of the child. The father would not want the child to avoid it. Should I keep my baby away from water all the days of her life just because she's afraid now? Certainly not. Definitely not, because that's not good for her. So as a father, I do not want her to avoid her fears as well, because I don't want that fear to limit her forever. But I want to help her to overcome it. But at the same time, I am gentle and I'm sensitive. And that's how God is with us. The Bible seems to suggest that yes, while God has things that He wants us to do, while God wants us to follow Him, He is sensitive to our fear, just as He was sensitive to Gideon's fear, just as He made extra arrangements to help Gideon to be less fearful. And we see this in the Bible. We see it in how God prepares, how God helps Elijah when Elijah is fearful. We see how Jesus knew that Peter was going to give in to his fear when Jesus was crucified. Jesus knew it very well. Jesus foretold his fear. And yet, God makes arrangement. In Jesus' case, He just told Peter that when it's okay, y'all just be scattered. And y'all go to Galilee. Y'all wait for me. And indeed, Jesus later went to look for His apostles, went to look for His disciples to restore them. When God calls us, He knows our fear. When God tells us to do something that is beyond us, God knows what we are afraid of. He knows it very well. And He wants to help us. He wants to hold our hand, just like in the picture here, like the father holding the child to help the child to walk. God wants to help us, to hold us, to follow Him, so that we can follow Him despite our fear. God does not present Himself as a boss, but God very much wants for us to identify Him as our Father. And that's why Paul says that we've been given the spirit of sonship. We have been called to be sons and daughters of God. I remember when the time I was very afraid of teaching. As a Christian, as a Christian in the marketplace, in my school, I knew that God wanted me to work hard and to work as if for the Lord. I knew that God wanted me to excel where I could, but I was afraid. I didn't think that I could do it. Even today, one of my greatest fears is that I will not be able to deliver what I've promised. And as a teacher, when you're in the classroom, you have to deliver. So we fast forward to the time from just now I was saying, to a time where I was in my 4th year of teacher training college. And that was when I was having my attachment in an actual school. At that time, I had been still traveling to Singapore every day. I was so tired. And during those days, your supervisor has to come in to observe your lessons. Your supervisor will, of course, critique you, evaluate you after certain lessons. I remember, I think I had one last lesson that had yet to be observed. But I didn't know how to teach it. I was so tired, I just couldn't do it. I said, God, I think I need your help. That night, I was so tired. I had to teach the next morning, but then I was so tired, I said, God, I don't care. I'm just too tired. So I went to sleep. When I went to sleep, right, I dreamt about teaching. And that's quite normal. A lot of times when I'm worried about something, I'll dream about it when I'm sleeping. It's how my worries manifest themselves. But at that night, when I dreamt about teaching, I dreamt about what I could do in the class. I dreamt that I could divide that class into different groups. I could give them some mahjong paper. I could let them do some group work. When I woke up, I remember this dream very clearly, and when I woke up, it was already like 4 a.m. I had to get ready to go to school. But that dream stayed with me, and I realized, hey, that teaching, that lesson that I dreamt about, I can really do it. It takes very little preparation, and you meet all the lesson objectives that I wanted to meet. So I rushed to school, I did a quick preparation, and I rolled out the lesson that very morning. The kids enjoyed the lesson, I enjoyed teaching the lesson, my supervisor enjoyed observing the lesson. And that was the lesson that I was the most proud of throughout my entire attachment period. Just from one dream. Because my father helped me in my fear. I remember when I was younger, when I first learned how to drive, and I learned it pretty late. Maybe I think I was about 20 years old when I first learned how to drive, or maybe even 21 years old. And one of my fears was to get into an accident. I was terribly afraid of it. Even when I was going through my lessons with the instructor, I knew that I had so much fear when it came to driving. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to react. I didn't even know how to cut out into the main road sometimes. But Auntie Kim always told me at that time, Auntie Kim always said, Danny, when you drive, when you finally learn how to drive, it's like you have legs. You can actually do ministry, you can do a lot of things by yourself suddenly. And I remember that, and I also knew that I needed to learn how to drive. If not, how am I going to do all my ministry work? So, I learned how to drive, but still I was so afraid. I passed, I got my driving license, but I was still afraid to drive long distances. But I drove. And remember, part of that fear is that fear of getting into an accident. So what do you think God would do in that situation? If He's really my Father? Allow me to be bound by that fear of accidents forever and ever? No. God allowed me to get into an accident. So what happened was that one day I was driving to school, all the way to Jurong, NTU. I was on the KJE. I was on the extreme right lane. I was keeping to the speed limit. And as I was driving, my brother was beside me, and suddenly I saw that the car in front of me came to a stop. But thank God, because I'm don't say fearful, okay? Say I'm a defensive driver. So I kept a good distance from the car in front of me, and I managed to stop in time. Thank God. Except, what happened? The car behind me didn't stop in time. I looked at my rear view mirror and just see this car coming to me really fast, and he crashes into me. And after that, my memory is fuzzy. Till today, I cannot really remember what exactly happened. What my brother told me later on was that I lost control of the vehicle. My car crashed into the car in front of me. It went between the car in front of me and the divider, so I went to the right, and I'm already at the extreme right lane. So everything gets scraped off, right? And I lose further control of my vehicle. My car swerves to the left across the highway. And I think I remember 2 more impacts. There were 2 other cars that crashed into me on the highway because they couldn't stop in time. Because remember, I went across the highway. When the car finally stopped, I was afraid. I said, how? What am I going to do? How am I going to tell my parents, because it's my father's car? But amazingly, what happened? Someone stopped. They managed to guide us to the road shoulder. And the fella who stopped, I don't know whether it's God's will or not, because this fella, his friend owned a workshop, right? So he was going to help us to get the car to his friend's workshop, and that workshop would settle everything to us. And this uncle even brought us to the police station so that we can make a police report about it, so that the insurance, all these can be processed. I was so afraid of getting to an accident that God gave me a really bad one. That accident alone, I think, would have cost me tens of thousands Sing dollars just to repair one Myvi. But because the fella crashed into me, and because the workshop, they want to get the profit, so their lawyer just take care of everything, and all I have to do was to wait 2 weeks, and I get the car back. Everything is well repaired, and there's even a new car smell. Of course, today there are still some problems, but this was an accident where it was really bad, and I didn't even have to pay a single cent. So God helped me to overcome my fear of accidents. And through that experience, I also became a better driver. I don't know how it is for you guys. We all have our different fears, and God will have His different ways of helping us deal with our fears. But what I will say is this: is there any fear that has stopped us from obeying God fully, from walking to God in faith? The only one that can help us to overcome our fear is not ourselves. No amount of positive talk, no amount of, yes, I can do it, will help us. But God can. God can help us to deal with our own fear. So let us hand our fear to God and trust that He will help us to move past it. Only like this will we be able to obey God in faith and not be bound by our fear. I would like to end my sharing with this verse from Psalm chapter 23, verse 4. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff comfort me. This writer in this psalm, why did he walk through the darkest valley? Because he was following his Lord and his shepherd. It was his Lord who brought him into that dark valley. But it is the same Lord who will comfort him, who will make him see that he is okay, because God is with him. God bless all of you. Let's continue to pray for each other and for the situation during this season. Thank you. God bless you.